I often complain about landlords on this show. Regular viewers will know that. I get pretty pissed off about the amount of rent I have to pay. But in making a podcast I've been doing, Crash Course with Michael Walker, I had the opportunity, finally, to debate one. So I debated a man called Greg Suman. He is president-elect of the Association of Residential Lettings Agents. He's also a landlord of free properties. I'm going to show you a couple of clips. The first, we're discussing Section 21. That's the part of housing law which means that landlords can get rid of tenants without them having done anything wrong or without them being in arrears. It's called a no-fault eviction. I think it should go. He thinks it should stay. Take a look at his reason why.
Every interference in the rental market through legislation and regulation has a direct knock-on effect on those people who are, in my opinion, the most vulnerable in the current housing market. So as a result of the Section 21 being introduced, landlords had the reassurance that by investing their money into the private rented sector, they will be able to have a fair relationship with their customers, tenants. Now, if we reduce the landlord's rights where they think, I may not be able to get a bad tenant out, and it's important to clarify that no landlord would ever think of evicting a good tenant, then there's just going to be less and less supply, which is what we're currently seeing, which is why rents are skyrocketing.
So there's a couple of things to mention there. First of all, I think I want to pick you up on this idea that no landlord would ever evict a good tenant. Now, I see what you're saying on one level. No landlord would evict a tenant who is paying them the rent they want to receive and isn't causing them any problems. But for me, it could be the case that a landlord says, look, property prices are increasing in the area where I own this home. I could rent this property to someone richer, or I could rent this property to someone who isn't asserting their rights, because I imagine for some landlords it is frustrating when you've got a tenant who knows the law. And they can say, look, I would prefer to rent this property to someone else who might be less assertive in terms of the repairs they want doing, and who might be able to pay more for it. So, you know, from the perspective of a landlord, that might make that person a bad tenant or not an ideal tenant. But from my perspective, you know, that tenant hasn't done anything wrong, yet they could still be evicted. Do you see where I'm coming from?
Greg did go on to accept that the definition of a good tenant might depend on the perspective of the person talking. I want to jump to a different part of the debate, though. This is the bit that really floored me.
Now, personally, when landlords talk about profits and losses, they say, oh, I'm only, the rent is only a few £100s more than my mortgage repayments. I'm not rinsing this property for money. I'm not exploiting these tenants because I'm not making a massive profit. Well, you might not be making a massive month-to-month profit, but at the end of this whole process, you've got someone else to pay for your mortgage. And at the end of this whole, rigmarole, where someone has been paying 50% of their earnings to you every month, you have a very valuable asset. You're sitting on a big asset. So I don't really see why landlords expect to both make a month-to-month profit and acquire a very valuable asset at the end of it. It seems like they want their cake and to eat it. You'll say, I want someone else to pay my mortgage, and I want them to pay above and beyond that as well. Now, to me, that doesn't seem particularly fair. That's not a fair relationship. And that's why I'm very frustrated as a renter, because I feel like I am giving so much of my earnings to someone to buy them a flat.
Well, the argument there, and we can dissect it because there are several points you made, and they're all very, very valid. So firstly, why is it that you're not a property owner? Why is, and I'm saying you, I mean, why is this hypothetical tenant not a property owner? Why don't they buy their own property and pay off their own mortgage? So that's point one. Point two, I agree that when there are profits, we can have this conversation. But when there is an £850 a month loss that the landlord has to subsidize somebody's rent by every single month in a market where house values have fallen, and the prediction is that they could fall further. Now, why would a landlord stay in this market? Why would they not just sell and maybe return to the market when conditions become more favorable?
Don't like renting, just buy a house. That was the message, I think. I should say, I was recording that as a podcast, so I didn't quite realize we were going to be putting it out as a video, but then the video was quite good. But you could see a lot of washing in the background. I was actually at my sister's. She's just had a baby, right? So give her a break. It wasn't the tidiest of lofts. I probably would have sorted out the background. Aaron, what did you make of that? Don't like renting, just buy a house.
I think it's brilliant that you went straight to the horse's mouth and got this degenerate nonsense, quite frankly, Michael. A few things. He says, landlords don't want to evict a good tenant. I can only imagine that he's qualifying, quote unquote, a good tenant as somebody who does absolutely everything the landlord asks and will pay any increase in rent that the landlord ever stipulates. That's a good tenant. Okay, if this person will literally do anything that they're told to do and they'll pay any price that they're demanded of, that's a good tenant. Okay, well, I think that's a strange way to phrase it, but there we are. And in terms of the money making, Michael, I often listen to the Property Podcast. It's a very popular podcast amongst people who are in the buy-to-let sort of game. And it was really interesting to me, Michael, because I was listening to their predictions for 2023, and they give, where they would like to go. And by the way, it's not good. They're all saying, if you're in the south, go north. Go to Liverpool, go to Manchester, go to Derby, go to Glasgow. The one that really stuck out, though, was Derby. They said Derby's fantastic because it has good paying jobs. You've got Bombardier, you've got, industrial manufacturing jobs nearby, but the rent's still really cheap. Well, that's not good. Well paid jobs, but housing which doesn't take an absolute, bombshell out of your wallet every payday. That's not good. We have to rectify that. We're advising you to go and buy property up in Derby so that you can, obviously have an appreciating asset in terms of value, as you talked about, Michael. You can also make a nice, healthy profit too. This is about making money off other people, of their suffering. And it's important to say, housing is like such a fundamental thing to live a decent, meaningful life. There was a story a few days ago, Michael, of a young woman, I believe, of Cantonese heritage. She was renting a place in West London, £900 a month she was paying. She couldn't afford to eat. She was having to choose between housing and food. She felt ashamed of her situation. I believe a younger woman finding her way in the world of work. She killed herself. That is what these people are doing. Now, it's not direct, but there's clearly a causal relationship between millions of people feeling their lives as shit and people like this gentleman and the interests he represents with regards to landlords and renting. He said, the housing market isn't necessarily good. Property prices are actually going down. It's nonsense. Stop lying. Yes, we've had a few bad months, but if you look, for instance, at 2020 to now, with COVID, Michael, you're looking at property value increases in many parts of the country, 20 to 25%. In the last few months, they've gone down maybe 2 or 3%. They're still up, a fifth to a quarter in the last 2 to 3 years. So this idea that, actually property is now going down, it's not all apple pie and lullabies and sugary sweets for landlords. They have to have the bitter lemon too. It's ridiculous. You're talking complete nonsense and baloney. These people are destroying the lives, frankly, of millions of people. They're not providing a service. If the landlord wasn't making any money, then they'd have to sell the property. Great. Let's have a massive influx of property onto the market, have a massive increase in supply, and the prices will go down. And maybe some of the people that are renting will be able to get a place of their own and have a little bit more security than they do with people like the people that this gentleman represents. It's outrageous. It's an outrageous way to run a country. It's an outrageous thing to try and defend. Put on your suit, put on your tie. That's it. Nice haircut. Bit of, Emporio Armani. Why can't you just buy a house, Michael Walker? What's wrong with you? Why can't you just buy a house? Little Mont Blanc pen. There we go. Calvin Klein underwear. Why can't you just buy a house? It's not that easy, mate.